Okay, now I'm going to start the timer. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're here to discuss Universal Safety Technologies and their Salesforce implementation project. They're a provider of safety and security systems to commercial customers in the US and Canada. Their main processes are sales, design, installation, maintenance, monitoring, and service. That is their life cycle. The primary pain point is they have siloed systems, which is leading to more work for employees. And their goal is to create more efficient processes to better protect people, property, and assets from fire and theft. Some broad assumptions: data secure by default, both at rest and in transit, buy before build, an MVP approach, and that the design tool that exists in their landscape can be modified and also can initiate an integration. My org strategy is single org. There's no explicit compliance requirement for data residency. There's unified global business process. We can fit within the limits, the governor limits of a single org. This will make a single view of CRM data easier, and collaboration across all of that data and reporting across all that, and operational reports as well. And it'll minimize our integration effort required for this project, which has a 4-month delivery goal. So that is the reason for our MVP approach. We'll also be using multi-currency, multi-language, more to come on that. The actors involved internally will be the system specialist, support rep, and managers at various levels. The system specialists will have Sales Cloud. They'll be working with order, the order object. Support rep will have Service Cloud due to the need for Service Cloud voice and omnichannel. The managers will have Sales Cloud and Tableau CRM. They report on sales activity and use advanced analytics. The contractors, so externally now, with contractors, they will have the CC license. They don't have a need for advanced sharing or reporting. The primary customer contact will have a CC Plus license. They will be using the delegated admin feature to manage their users at their company. And the secondary customer contact will be customer community license. They also don't have need for advanced sharing, role hierarchy, or reporting. The role hierarchy on the service side, pretty straightforward. It's just divided into US and Canada. There's no management mentioned relevant for this project, so I just have them reporting to a theoretical CEO. On the sales side, we have a headquarter manager, which is a single role. Beneath that, regional manager. There's 15 of those roles, one per region. And then below that, we have office manager and system specialist. For each of those, there's a role per office, so 150 roles on each of these levels. And then reporting to the system, or owned by the system specialist, will be the primary customer contact, or the customer account. So this primary customer contact role will roll up to the system specialist. This has a separate role per customer account, and it's an external role. Now to the system landscape, starting with how those users will access the new Salesforce system. We'll start with the internal users whose identities are stored in Active Directory. We'll be using IWA so that they can get SSO when they are authenticated into their network. ADFS is what I'm recommending as the IDP. It will support the SP initiated SAML SSO. They were looking for deep linking functionality, so that will support that. The customers will be using a mobile publisher app and Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn to authenticate via social sign-on using the OpenID Connect flow, layered with user agent flow for the app to connect. Or they can just access via browser and Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. The contractor will be using a browser and the username and password login to access the experience site. The internal system specialist will be using a Salesforce mobile app, so that will be a user agent flow layered with SAML. The quick note on the mobile apps. For the mobile publisher and on Salesforce mobile app, I went with the simplest app that could meet requirements. There's no custom development required for these types, so it reduces risk of delivery of the project. And given that 4 months is the main goal of this project, we want to minimize those work streams. I did not see any requirement like perfect branding, perfect performance, or real-time location services or background processes that would have pushed me to a hybrid or custom native app. Salesforce itself will have My Domain enabled to support Experience Site and single sign-on. They'll have Service Cloud, Sales Cloud, Service Cloud Voice. App Exchange-wise, it'll have Conga, DocuSign, and SMS Magic. Of course, we'll have the Experience Site, which will be a customer community. Reports and dashboards will be used for operational reporting. I forgot to write it here, but Tableau CRM will be used for the cross-platform reporting or LDV reporting, anything beyond the capability of reports and dashboards. So together, that's our reporting strategy. Salesforce files, due to the number of users, which is about 3,680, we have a roughly 7.3 terabytes of file storage available in Salesforce, and together with an archival strategy that will be sufficient for all of our files needs. We will archive files as soon as projects are delivered or installations are complete and they are no longer needed at that point. They will be archived. More on that later. Integration-wise, we have a website which will connect directly to Salesforce via the web to lead functionality. But we'll also, every other integration besides that and mobile will be going through either the ETL or ESB we'll be introducing. Both of these will connect to Salesforce via the JOT-bearer flow and use two-way SSL to encrypt data in transit. ESB will connect using REST and Comet D. ETL will be using bulk. Both of these will be used to decouple systems and avoid point-to-point integrations, and will handle things like protocol conversion, data translations, transactionality, and complex orchestrations across multiple systems. So we can roll back all of them if they have an issue. Keep systems in sync. The ESB will be used more for near real-time small volume interactions that are event-driven, and the ETL will be for periodic or scheduled large volume operations, and such as data migration and archival. So the ETL will be migrating data from the existing CRM, which we'll be replacing with Salesforce and therefore sunsetting, as well as the ERP, and actually some from the monitoring systems as well. I forgot to draw this arrow. We'll be migrating data via the ETL for that too. And then we'll be archiving data from Salesforce using the ETL to the data warehouse for data. ESB will help us integrate with the website, with the monitoring systems, design tool, and ERP. These are all existing systems. The ERP, there's 2. Monitoring systems, there's 3. So the ESB will also come in handy for orchestrating and calling the right systems and handling all that for us. And the devices will feed data directly to the monitoring system. That's existing functionality. ADFS will also be used for SAML SSO into the monitoring system and ERP as mentioned as well. Here, moving on, we'll get to these integrations as we approach them. The data model, just to explain a legend. So all the relationships here ended up being lookups. There's no master details. The skinny black outline is standard objects. The blue is custom, and then the green is, there's only one of those. It's an external object. SS just means system specialist, SR support rep, PCC is primary customer contact, and then P is private, CBP controlled by parent. Those are the org-wide defaults. So every object you can see that on. We will step through this sort of as we go through the scenario. At the beginning, there are 5,000 leads a month. Lead is private, owned by the support rep. It converts into a account and contact pretty quickly after pre-qualification. Account is private, owned by the system specialist. There's with growth, it'll be about 150,000 accounts as mentioned here. And then contacts, I'm just guessing or estimating 300,000. It'll be controlled by parent. Account types, we've got contractor and customer here. And then each account has roughly 2 locations, so 300,000 locations. They're private, owned by the primary customer contact. And then there's a sales process here, which will be using a custom object called estimate. I heavily considered using opportunity. However, because the customer and contractor had to be heavily involved in this process and definitely have visibility to this object, I went with a custom estimate object, which will be private, owned by the system specialist, estimating about 3,000 of the 5,000 leads get through to this point. But the important thing to note is, we would have had to give partner community licenses if we used opportunity to all of these users. So over 800,000, I did not think that it was justified, given that we, at this point, are not even using line items, because my assumption is this early in the sales process, we don't even have a bill of materials yet. They're making designs at a high level. Later is when the order object comes into play, is when we actually get a bill of materials using the products and product objects and price books, price book entries. So on to the business requirements in a bit more detail. Starting with the sales and design process, we're using Service Cloud Voice to route phone calls that come in with omnichannel, and we're using a web to lead form for the website in order to intake leads that way. And then we're using lead assignment rules, I should say, for the routing of the web to lead based on I believe it says geography or location information. So next, there's 5,000 of these a month, so that's under the web to lead limit of 500 a day. No concern there. There's a pre-qualification custom questionnaire, which I interpret to be, or I'm recommending a screen flow on the lead to ask that questionnaire over the phone. And then we'll convert the lead at this point. There's then a site visit that needs to be created and assigned to a system specialist. That'll be modeled by the task object here, which will be post-conversion, so that it'll convert into account and contact, and they'll create an estimate at that point as well. And then this will be the task underneath the estimate, which represents the site visit, as you can see, assigned to the system specialist. Volume will be about 3,000 a month on this as well. So what they do during the site visit, they take videos and photos. Those need to be accessible in Salesforce. They create a preliminary estimate, send via email, and then capture GPS location information. So this is where they'll use the Salesforce mobile app. They can upload photos and videos via the files related list on Opportunity. My assumption is these are very short videos, which would be under 100 megs, and this is, again, files we can archive once they're no longer needed, which will be later on once the installation is complete. As for the preliminary estimate, so the system specialist will be updating this estimate based on information they gather during the site visit. Forgot to mention, we'll use an LWC to use the geolocation API to get the GPS info from the device and save that to the location. So the task will also have a lookup to this location object. And then, at that point, I'm presuming, since it's just a preliminary estimate, that it's acceptable to just use an email template with some merge fields from this estimate object, since they're not signing it and it's not an official document, it's just informational. So they'll create the estimate, and then this needs to kick off giving the customer access to the experience site in Salesforce, and they need to collaborate. So we'll have a trigger on the estimate creation to enable the existing account and contact as a customer account and contact, and use a queuable Apex to create the user to avoid the mixed EML error. That'll send them the welcome email as well. They create design plans with a custom design tool. They can be over 100 megabytes. They should be accessible in Salesforce. So my assumption here that I stated previously is the design tool can be modified, allow them to manually enter the Salesforce record ID of this estimate, and then initiate the integration to send back the PDF and the record ID that's entered to be able to save it against the estimate in the files related list by inserting a content document with the first published location. So this is kicked off by a button click in the design tool. It's a remote call-in with the REST API. The design tool will call the ESB, which calls the Salesforce REST API. It's a design tool created doc that needs to be visible in Salesforce. That's a justification for this pattern. Once the doc is created, they need to notify the customer. The customer can collaborate and ultimately digitally sign. So the SS user can just chatter @mention the customer that needs to look at it. They can use chatter to collaborate from that point. And then we'd be using Conga for the estimate document generation and DocuSign for the e-signature by the customer. Here that they also provide financial data. The system specialist it records it against the location. And then there's an approval process with a local manager and possibly a regional manager conditionally if the installation cost is high enough. So that'll be a standard out of the box approval process on the financial data object with a conditional step depending on what the data entered is. So here, I haven't mentioned that object yet. So it's related to the location. It's a separate object due to some privacy and sharing functionality. We need to lock it down further than the location. And it'll be private. It'll be owned by the system specialist as well. The volume will be about the same as the location. It should be about a 1-to-1 ratio, I'm assuming. Customers need to use Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. So that's social sign-on. They'll set up auth providers for each of these, generate a registration handler, and assign it to each, and then edit the login page to surface these as options. Next phase, contracting and installation. So here's where the contractor comes into the picture. They are created and mastered in ERP and can't be updated or created in Salesforce. So we'll have a validation rule to prevent any accounts of type contractor from being created or edited in Salesforce. The contractors should be sent daily and automatically provisioned for access. So we'll have an integration, a nightly batch from the ETL, which will pick up the new the deltas in the ERP contractor records, and then load them into Salesforce with a batch data sync pattern using the bulk API. Its justification is only needed daily, and it's a large volume operation. From there, there's an Apex trigger on the create of the contractor account in Salesforce to enable it as a customer account, and then use a queuable job to create the user again, to avoid that mixed DML and send the welcome email. Next, the system specialist selects a contractor for the installation. And the customer design docs, estimates, photos, and videos become available. So it mentions installation, and I have an object called installation. I want to preempt any confusion here. Really, this is really still just bringing the contractor into the design phase at this point. We're not actually starting work. So we're actually talking about the estimate object, which will be shared to the contractor at this point. I forgot to draw, but it'll have an additional lookup to the contractor account, and we'll use a sharing set to grant that contractor access to that estimate that they need access to in order to see the related documents in the files related list, the on-site visit, etc. Granting, and that'll grant edit access based on the lookup to the contractor account being the same as the user's account lookup. The contractor reviews and collaborates. Then they revise where needed, and if needed, repeat the approval process. So we'll use Chatter for the collaboration. They can request changes via Chatter. The SS will update the doc, the design doc that is, which would restart the approval process so that those changes can be approved. The contractor indicates acceptance, generate a contracting agreement to sign. So they can indicate acceptance just via checking a checkbox field or via quick action on the estimate. It triggers the Conga document generation, DocuSign e-signature envelope to be sent. The contractor will sign it, and it'll be stored in the files related list. The system specialist is notified of the contractor acceptance and then places the order for the devices, materials, and supplies. So as you can see here, this is where the actual products come into the picture. Once the design has been finalized, they figure out, the system specialist will figure out what products are actually needed to meet this design. So this will be, on the DocuSign envelope status update becoming signed or fully signed. There will be an after save flow, which will Chatter post on the parent's estimate record and @mention the system specialist to let them know they're good to go. The order is created in Salesforce. Once it's flagged complete, they need to send that to the ERP. So my assumption here is the system specialist creates the order manually and then builds out the order products related based on the agreed upon design. Mark that order complete, and then that'll kick off another integration where Salesforce will use a fire and forget pattern with after save flow publishing a platform event, which the ESB will subscribe to, call into the ERP to create the order. There's no need for an immediate reply. That's why we're using, or confirmation. That's why we're using fire and forget. But I am recommending we receive a response from the ERP, and then the ESB will call back into Salesforce via remote call-in via the REST API to update the Salesforce order with the ERP details. So the reason we're doing that is this requirement saying the detailed order data from ERP needs to be viewable from within Salesforce. Next, when the ERP then sort of becomes the system that manages the order, it needs to send updates to Salesforce. So we'll have another integration where anytime the order status is updated in ERP, ERP calls the ESB, which remote call in to Salesforce REST API to update the order status for the corresponding Salesforce order. We'll have the ERP store the Salesforce orders Salesforce ID via the previous integration. The reason we're using remote call-in here, it's near real-time, small volume, and externally initiated. Once the order arrives, then the system specialist and contractor need to be notified by SMS and email. The the integration we just talked about will update the status to arrived. We'll have an after save flow to send the email, SMS, use SMS magic to send the SMS to the system specialist and contractor. So during the actual installation, when devices are added, they get automatically connected to the appropriate monitoring system here, shown here. And then they need that to automatically create a record in Salesforce for the device and associated to the location. So we'll need an integration here. Later, it's mentioned that this system can initiate integrations. So we'll have the monitoring system call the ESB, which will remote call in the Salesforce REST API to create an asset when the device is added in the monitoring system. And my assumption here is that the device can pass the GPS coordinates it has to the monitoring system, which can then be passed as part of this integration. And we can have a trigger on the create of an asset, which queries the location record with the closest distance and associate the asset to that location so that it ultimately has is associated to the right customer account. We'll also be saving the stringified barcode. Each device is going to have a barcode, and it'll come into play later more, but we'll have this stringified barcode saved within Salesforce as well, which is done by this integration. I assume the stringified barcode is device metadata that's available. So once the install is final, Salesforce is updated by the system specialist, and there's a creation of an invoice in ERP. So Salesforce is going to have a fire and forget pattern after save flow, platform event publish, ESB subscribe, call into ERP, create the invoice. There's no need for immediate reply or confirmation. That's why we're using fire and forget. Quickly to recap, that was the order process and the installation. Order and installation are both private objects owned by the system specialist. Installation, guessing the volume should match locations. That seemed like a one-to-one. So 300,000 there. Moving on to scheduled maintenance process. So their maintenance schedule is set by the system specialist when the install is complete. So they'll create this record in this custom object called maintenance schedule. The system specialist will create it and then pass it to the support rep. As is mentioned here, it's managed by the support center after installation. Each customer location is serviced twice a year. So I assume one maintenance schedule per installation. Two scheduled, these will be modeled as work orders. So that would be 600,000 scheduled work orders per year based on this. We can archive work orders after they are complete. When it's 1 week away, they need to create the service order in the ERP. We'll have scheduled Apex nightly to query maintenance schedules where the next maintenance date, which is a field on it, is today plus 7 days, basically, and then create the work order at that time, but with a date that is 7 days in the future. And then we'll also have an integration here because the ERP needs to know about this. So when the work order is created or also completed in Salesforce, we'll again fire and forget with the after save flow and platform event, ESB subscribes, call into ERP, same pattern as the last one, but it upserts a service order in ERP, and again we'll pass the ID to link them together. Next, the system specialist updates on their mobile device. It needs to be updated on a real-time basis, so that's why we're reusing this for when it's completed or updated as well. And the app they'll be using is still the Salesforce mobile app, same one as with the site visit. Last process, monitoring and issue management. So there's 3 ways that these issues can be created. There's first way is via the monitoring system intelligent connection. This first bullet is just continuing to, monitoring system will continue to perform emergency services. So Salesforce doesn't need to worry about that. We don't need to build anything. There's the system can make real-time API calls as mentioned. So they need Salesforce to be updated with when certain events are raised. So we have another integration here. Monitoring system receives an error event, let's say. It will call the ESB, which will remote call in the Salesforce REST API to create a case. This is near real-time, small volume, and externally initiated. Next, the case will have the type of case will be device created. They also need to have a task created underneath the case. So we can just do that within Salesforce by having an after save flow on that case type to create an associated task to call the customer. The issues can also be raised by the customer contacts. So they can do this via web or mobile. They'll have access to the experience site, a mobile publisher app, and the contact support component to raise cases. They do need to be able to photograph the barcode and identify and sort of link that case then to an asset in Salesforce. So they'll take this picture with the mobile publisher app with a Lightning Web component that has, or they'll upload it with a Lightning Web component that has a JavaScript library to convert the barcode image to the tokenized string, query the asset that has that string on it, and associate it to the case that's being created, or associate the case to that asset. Issues, so they need to route based on geography and expertise. That'll be a case assignment rule to a geography-based queue, and then skill-based routing based on the expertise. Want to quickly catch up on the data model. So we have case here that's private, owned by the support rep. 6 million a year is the expected volume. We'll see that in a minute. And then we'll be using skill-based routing with the skill required. There's several other objects here. I didn't have room to draw them, but they represent skill-based routing. Next, there's a maintenance task. Can create a service order in ERP if maintenance or repair is needed. And the ERP needs to give immediate feedback of success or failure. So we'll provide a screen flow to create the work order in this case if it fits this use case. Salesforce will use a request and reply pattern this time with flow and external services because they need that immediate feedback of success or failure. And of course, we'll be going through the ESB to the ERP. Next, issues can also be put in by internal employees so that customers can call and the support reps can create the issues manually. The profile will have create case permissions. From this point, everything is already been covered. Last point here, the volume. So each location will produce an average of 20 issues per year. That's how we got to 6 million cases based on 300,000 locations. They need to be tracked, and about half of those will also require a work order for the unscheduled maintenance. So that's 6 million cases, 3 million work orders of the type unscheduled maintenance. So altogether with the scheduled work orders, that's 3.6 million a year. That's a large data volume. We'll archive cases, work orders, and also these tasks, which I think I forgot to mention. Oh, no, I did mention. But anyway, these are all transactional. They can be archived after they're closed. task I just have on here twice because this was the site visit and this is the calling the customer. They're handled by two different people for two different use cases. That's the same object though. So quickly, a note on the data volume. So case task work order, as I said, can just be archived before we get into the millions of records at any given time. So I don't expect performance issues there. Asset is the one object with a true large data volume that we cannot avoid. It's also not, it doesn't count against storage, which is good for us. You can't use skinny tables with it, which takes one tool out of our tool belt, but our approach will be to use selective queries whenever possible for list views and reports, leveraging standard indexes and keeping the volumes only returning the minimum number of fields required. We'll also, if we have to filter on other non-index fields, we can contact Salesforce to create a custom index for that. We'll also archive these as soon as they go out of service or no longer needed operationally for service. Data migration, so we need 5 years of leads from CRM, but the ERP will essentially win if they're already existing as an account and contact in ERP. So that sort of helps us know how to handle duplicates and merging. ERP, we need all customers, locations, and contacts. The ERP systems will also have the sales and service orders, and we need to be able to logically link all these records between Salesforce and ERP. And then the the monitoring systems have the devices which need to be replicated in Salesforce and also logically linked. We'll do that via the stringified barcode and perhaps also a serial number. And then the design docs are just sort of all over people's desktops. I'll talk about that approach. So the ERP, my assumption is we're going to have all these objects coming from ERP for in-flight deals and installations. I assume we'll have data in all these objects. It's account, contact, location, estimate, order product, installation, maintenance schedule, and work order. CRM will have the leads for the last 5 years. Monitoring system has the assets. Keep in mind there's 3 monitoring systems and 2 ERPs, so we'll have lots of deduplication, merge, and enrichment type of logic with ETL scripts. And then the desktop computers will designate a central share drive to collect these documents. To note, it's only the design docs for open orders, which greatly reduces the volume that we need to worry about. We create the shared drive, and then we'll have a naming convention where it's named after the ERP's order ID, or it will have that in the name so that we're able to link it to the appropriate Salesforce record based on that unique identifier. ETL will extract all of this data and dump it into first a staging raw source format database, and then we'll standardize, cleanse, dedupe among these 3 monitoring systems in ERP, and also for the CRM and ERP for conflicting leads and accounts and contacts. And we'll enrich that data as well if we can. We'll work with the business to define how that logic will work. We'll transform the shape of that data with ETL scripts to match the Salesforce schema format. We'll sort it by parent ID to minimize lock contention risk, sequence, as I mentioned, and then we'll use external IDs for a dual purpose here to maintain the relationships among the data elements that we'll be loading into Salesforce, but also to maintain the linkage between the Salesforce records and the corresponding ERP and monitoring system records as well. Non-operational data will go straight to a data warehouse for archival. So that would be things like leads older than 5 years, orders older than 3 years, and also inactive devices or customers, those sorts of things, or installations that are already complete, those sorts of things. We'll use the Bulk API 2.0 with parallel mode to load into Salesforce, first into a Dev Pro, then into a partial, then into a full sandbox, and then into production. with increasing volumes. We'll deactivate automations and validations prior to loading. We'd also defer sharing and activate parallel sharing recalculation and granular locking. We then load the data, then reactivate the automations, validations, resume and recalculate the sharing, and then of course, sanity test and make sure that we met our acceptance criteria for this data migration. Onto visibility and accessibility. System specialists need to view all the customer and installed system data for their own customers. That's just ownership. They need the same thing for other specialist customers in their local office. So that'll be an owner-based sharing rule per system specialist role, which is a total of 150 sharing rules. On account and also installation, granting read access to the members of the owner's role. We'd have no sharing rule on financial data. The managers need access to their areas, including the financial data. They'll get that via the role hierarchy from the system specialist. Contractors are able to edit the data only for their own, for the customer locations they've been assigned, except for the financial data, which they can't access. So location is going to have a lookup to contractor account. I forgot to draw that. So it actually has two lookups to account, one customer, one contractor. And we can use a sharing set granting edit access to the contractor based on that shared account lookup. My assumption here is only one contractor at a time works on one location. Customer contacts should be able to edit their own customer contact and installed system data. So the org-wide default will be private for account and installation. There'll be a sharing set on account where the ID is the user's account, just to raise their access from a read to edit. The contact will be controlled by parents, so they'll get access to that. Sharing set also on installation, where the installation's locations account is the user's account, and granting edit access there. There's this customers with the account hierarchy. Primary need to be able to see location and subordinate data. We can fulfill this with external account hierarchy, which will sort of make the lower accounts roles roll up to the top role in each higher account. My assumption by what is meant by subordinate data here is means accounts and locations for the accounts that are lower in the hierarchy. Support center representatives need to see all the data in their geography, except for the financial data. So each object with an org-wide default private, I'm not going to list them all here, but they need to have a geography field, which will say US or Canada. And they also need two criteria-based sharing rules, one for each, to support to share the records to support reps US or Canada with read access. I forgot to mention here the historical work order is also going to be an external object. That's the work orders get archived to the data warehouse and then surfaced here as reference data and via the historical work order object. I think I forgot to mention asset will be private, owned by the system specialist. There's 30 million of those. Reporting, support reps and managers and system specialists need to report on sales activity and schedules. So that's just Salesforce reports on operational data. They also need to report on the number of device monitoring events. So I assume that this is referring to only the events that end up creating cases. So that'll just be a Salesforce case report. Managers have ad hoc trending, showing a lot of types of information sliced and diced, including monitoring system activity. So Tableau CRM is my recommendation for cross-platform LDV reporting. Customer contacts need to show issues, reports showing issues of their statuses for what they have access to. This can be achieved with a case list view. It doesn't mandate a higher license for reporting. Report can be run live from the public website, showing the number of events and installations for the US and Canada. So I'm recommending they just use a web component in the website and an integration to retrieve that data in real time, which can call the ESB, which calls Salesforce to get the count of the installations via the remote call-in REST API. And then they can call each of the three monitoring systems to total up the number of total events. My at least that's my interpretation, is they're interested in all events for that one. Project and development, English and French. We'll use activate multi-language using the translation workbench for standard UI, custom labels for custom UI, VF email templates for emails, and then we'll surface the language selector component in the experience site for multi-language communities. And I think I just ran out of time. Should I continue or should we wrap here?
I think you should wrap it.
We're stopping. Yeah, we're stopping.
Okay.
Okay. James, do you want to complete your presentation?
Sure. So they've got geographically separate teams and the two for the two ERPs and the 3 monitoring systems. So they'll need some strong central governance here to ensure that all the teams are following the same standards, best practices, convention, design principles, processes, etc., to align the schedules and tooling and make sure everyone's on the same page and is following a consistent process. To note here, that's also a highly regulated industry, as mentioned. So we definitely want legal compliance and InfoSec within our COE to be consulted. There's only one dev and one test environment here for these aforementioned systems. So we need strong communication between teams of who's doing what in which environment and when to avoid conflicts. And we need to reuse these environments for multiple purposes. For example, continuous integration and maybe also other types of testing, UAT, etc. And they want sales management wants a big bang release in 4 months. We would want to try to negotiate a phased release and an MVP approach to this whole effort. And we want to set realistic expectations of what's possible in a 4-month time frame. And we need also the steering committee to make this project the top priority for the company. There can't be other, if we're going to do this in 4 months, there can't be any other projects competing for priority. They wanted recommendations about design issues, team management, etc. So methodology will be waterfall, agile, hybrid, waterfall overall to try to meet that aggressive deadline, ensure that testing starts early enough. And then also for integrations, for a contract first approach, which will enable parallel development. And the rest of the team, Scrum teams will use Agile so they can iterate quickly, do demos, get feedback, learn about issues early, shift left. And then we'd use Jira for requirement traceability and prioritization at a tactical level, whereas the steering committee will be the overall priority at a strategic level, and also the vision. We'll have a COE under that, legal, compliance, InfoSec, IT, business units, POs. They'll facilitate standards, communication about what's going on in the company, enablement, facilitate buy-in and alignment, and also adoption. ARB, Architecture Review Board, will have evangelize design principles, the style guides, handle code review issues and escalations, and provide coaching. PMO will manage the schedules, remove blockers, escalate any delays to the steer coast because of that aggressive time frame. Change control board will prevent scope creep and also communicate changes that will be happening. Here's all the Scrum teams. I won't name them all, but they'll be doing daily stand-ups and a scrum of scrums for inter-team communication. Environment type and testing type here along the top for our environment strategy. Devs will develop in Scratch orgs and do unit testing there, commit their built features to GitHub, open pull requests, which will trigger a static code analysis by code scan. And then that'll also trigger a CI deployment and test with Travis CI, deploying to a build environment, which is a dev sandbox that'll do automated regression testing there. They'll also, if those tests all pass, we'd move on and do a code review, and then ultimately merge that pull request, then we can use Travis to deploy to the rest of the environments from left to right. SIT first, which is Dev Pro environment. We'll do integration, testing, functional QA, mocks and stubs, Selenium, start data migration testing there with small volumes. Then UAT, which is a partial environment, user acceptance testing and end-to-end testing. Staging would be next with the full sandbox. We do performance testing and data migration, full volume test there, and then deploy to production and do smoke testing there. If there's production issues, we can use a hotfix environment as production support. That'll be a dev environment. If any issues are found along the way in any of these environments, they'll be fixed at the source in the Scratch org and promoted through this process again. And you can see an example of what the branching strategy would be likely to look like here. I'll skip the identity and conclude the presentation there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, James. I want to start with, can you go to system landscape, please? Or system architecture diagram? So you made a few choices here for systems authenticating with Salesforce. For example, the user agent flow with OpenID Connect and JWT for ETL and ESB. Can you explain a little bit for each of these, why you choosing the flows that you choosing there? And if there is any other alternative you considered and why you went with what you choosing?
Yes, thank you for the question. User agent was the OAuth flow I used for the mobile apps. The reason being because they would not be able to securely store a secret. So I considered web server, but that would require them to store the client secret, and they cannot do that securely. And also the Salesforce, these sort of out of the box applications, user agent is what they use. It's we can't really change that. So to avoid custom work, I will just go with the default that they prescribe. For Jot, I use those for server to server integrations that don't involve a human actually as a user, with the reason being we can use the exchange of certificates to build the trust between the two systems and avoid having to have a human actively manage the integration.
James, can you explain how the user agent flow works?
Sure. So first, the application will.
Sorry, James, you had a diagram. Did you have a diagram for flows? Any of these explained there that you wanted to use?
I drew the SP SAM initiated SAML and Jot, but the user agent I can just verbally describe if you like.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the application will request a token from the Salesforce authorization server, the token endpoint. This flow skips the authorization code and goes straight to requesting a token based on the redirect and the callback URLs matching, and will provide the client ID and request back the token. The authorization server will send back the access token and optionally a refresh token, which can be used with the access token can be used to call the Salesforce APIs to provide the experience and access to Salesforce data from the mobile app.
James, for the user agent flow, how do you set up that in Salesforce? Anything you do?
Salesforce, yeah, it would need a connected app with and the connected app would need the let me stop there. Did you have more question beyond that?
No, that's the question I had. Oh, do you have any questions? More?
Yes, but can you go back to the system landscape again, James?
Sure.
For the integration between ESP or ETL and Salesforce, you did mention that you need to use two-way SSL. Can you explain why we need two-way SSL and how it will be configured or enabled for Salesforce integrations?
Sure. As for why, it was my assumption that because this is a highly regulated industry and data security is paramount, it was my understanding that we would want to encrypt the data in transit. Um, uh, so how to set it up would be first we need to contact Salesforce to enable it as an option, and then assign the integration user that's used the permission to require them to use the port 8443 for any authentications.
Okay, thanks, James. Last question on this. I have seen ASP ETL ahead of the firewall. Is this something that you meant or you want to explain?
Oh, that was just an assumption I made. It could just as easily be the ETL inside the firewall and the ESB sort of in the DMZ.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, James. James, you mentioned one of the reasons we are going with the ESP was to support the rollbacks. Can you explain to me in which scenarios you'll do rollback and what is the end-to-end process?
Yeah. So an example would be uh, integration 3, which involves multiple systems, let's say. So if we got as far as the final leg of it and Salesforce sent back some sort of error, and we wanted to maintain the, the, the sync between these two, we want to basically have an all or nothing transaction across multiple systems. The ESB would be able uh, to undo the previous things and let the user or an admin know that that needs to be retried if it can't recover from its own retry logic. If that fails, I mean.
Okay, so you are saying for when the audit is set to complete, and if the ESP cannot reach, say the downstream, we are gonna change the status back to non-complete.
I don't know if this is a great example of what the point I was trying to make. I don't know if we have a great example here, um, but just in general, yeah, an ESP could be used to if multiple systems are updated based on an event, and you want it to be both or all of them, or none at all, and reinitiate the integration. It can do that. Is what I was trying to say.
Okay, so what would be the user experience? How would the user know, like, okay, is my thing going to be rollback? Is it going to go successfully? How is the user going to be confident of this his work?
It if it is similar to like a request reply pattern, then we can just display them the message in the user interface. If it's more of a fire and forget, then they can be assured that it will be completed, and it wouldn't be handled by the user. It would be handled by the um, like ESB administrator that would go in and fix the error if it can't be recovered from.
Okay, all right. Thank you. Ram.
So can you go to your data model, please? Yeah, you mentioned that you want to use a custom object estimate rather than using the opportunity, and you had given the license as the reason, right? And because you have about 800,000 users, and that's why you don't want to use the partner community license. So maybe can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. I didn't see that so we estimate is sort of doing the normal some of the normal business processes that might appear on an opportunity. Um, but I didn't think that we gained enough value from using the opportunity to justify 800,000 plus licenses to be upgraded, because we are not using things like team members. We're not using things like opportunity products here or opportunity schedules or splits. Any of those would maybe be a better justification for using opportunity. I didn't find any of those.
But we have got only 6,000 contractors, right? And contractors will be the one who would be basically working with the customers and the sales users as well.
Okay, my interpretation was all of these users would be interacting and needing to see the data that would be in that object. So that's why I came up with the 800,000 number. If it was just 6,000, that's a lot more manageable.
So do you change your solution?
My solution is currently built on the assumption that it's reliant on customers being able to access the data in this object. So I will stick to my current solution.
Just for the collaboration, right? Nothing else. They want to, because contractors wanted to speak to and collaborate with the customers, right? And you had two choices, whether you want to go with the custom object or whether you want to go with the opportunity. And if you want to go with the opportunity, then you will have to give them the partner community, which is costly. But they can collaborate on the account record as well, isn't it?
Yeah, that would do it as well. I think they also needed to see some files. So we could just create additional content document links to the account directly, and they could see the files under the account.
Okay, and also you have got a couple of other custom objects like installments, maintenance schedule, and you have the work order as well. So can you also explain that how are you creating these records and who would be owning those records, especially the custom objects, installation, maintenance, and work order?
Yeah. So the installation, once the order becomes completed, its status is controlled by the ERP. We'll be notified that the order is completed. The installation would be created at that point. That is something we can automate just with an after save flow to create the installation that looks up to the order and assign to the system specialist. That represents the work that the contractor is doing on site at the location. And then once the installation is complete, this scheduled maintenance or the maintenance schedule is created. It says it's set by the system specialist, so I'm assuming it's just created manually at that point by the system specialist. And then it's managed by the support center after that. So I'm assuming that they just assign a support rep as the owner.
So can you not use the same work order object for installation as well for contractors?
You could, yeah, you could use a different work or a different, just differentiated by record type or just a type field. Yeah, you could definitely use that object for that.
And what are you storing in maintenance schedule?
Maintenance schedule is basically just a collection of fields that automate the creation of work orders over time. So it's going to have things like a pick list field of how often that needs to happen, like monthly, quarterly, annually, weekly, etc. And then it'll keep track of the last maintenance date and the next maintenance date. And that can be used by we have a scheduled nightly flow, which will look up or it'll query the maintenance schedules that have a work order next scheduled date 7 days from then, and they create those work orders at that time based on that maintenance schedule. So it's really just a container for those fields.
So can those fields, if that is just a container, then can order become that container? If you can create more fields on the order itself and use that, because basically what you're using that you're having a batch class which is picking the value and creating work orders. So do we need a separate object for that, or can we store those field on the order itself?
Yeah, you make a very good point. We could just collapse that and just add those fields to the order to do that logic. Yes.
Okay. You also have one custom object skill required, right? How are you using that skill required object? And you also have mentioned that in the solution you are using the Amazon service, Amazon Connect for routing, right? Based on the skill routing. So how are you utilizing this object along with Amazon Connect?
Um, yeah, so the skill requirement is just used for the skill-based routing, which is also used for the cases that get generated by the devices. Um, the so there's a whole cluster of objects, skill, service resource, skill, service resource that I didn't draw here, that sort of match and make sure that only people with the skills, all the skills that the case requires, can be assigned to that as the owner of that case by Omnichannel or Amazon Connect.
Yeah, but because you're doing the case assignment here, right? And for case only, Omnichannel does support this skill-based routing, and that does not require these objects. Skill required is not required for if you are using Omnichannel skill-based routing, then Salesforce does give you that function, right? You can just create the service resource and you can utilize that. Do we need a skill required field here, a skill, a custom object here, just for the
Oh, no,
case routing?
I'm sorry. This wasn't supposed to be a custom object. I must have just forgotten the correct name of the object. Sorry about that. I meant to just symbolize skill-based routing with this.
Okay. Yeah. Do you guys have any other question on this?
Now I have a question on the next business process. Okay, I can go next. Can you go to contracting and installation section, requirement number 8. It's on page 6, where it says during installation, these devices record has to be created in Salesforce. You said that you're going to get the GPS and then figure out the location that way?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So what if that device is installed, like say on the fence of two companies? They have a device on the fence, which one belong to this company, one for the other company. So how can you rely on the GPS location to figure out the location?
Okay. Yeah. In that case, that wouldn't work. Perhaps there's some other metadata that the device has that we can use to match it to a location, such as maybe a designated address or yeah.
Yeah. Assume they know the say the serial number or the unique number of the asset. So how can you link to the customer or the location in Salesforce?
We can definitely create the asset record with the serial number.
Yeah, how do you link to the location of the customer?
I would think there has to be some sort of attribute in the monitoring system or device itself to allow us to identify the right location to link it to. So if it's not address and we can't use GPS, I'm sorry, I'm not thinking of what is that correct attribute to use.
Yeah, so what so in Salesforce, you have to create the customer, what are the locations that they have, and then when you start to install, the design or the contractor is going to say, I'm going to install this device in this location, right? So that's the business process. How would you automate this entire process? And then in Salesforce, you know exactly when a customer calls in for this location, these are the equipment. Can you think about the overall process and how this could be integrated?
Yeah. Let me see. So if we, since Salesforce is the system that is initiating the order and adding order products, then and the ERP is ordering them, we should be able to get.
Yeah. Assume the ERP knows against which location this order is for. Can you go with that assumption?
Okay. Yeah. In that case, the ESB can get this. So the monitoring system will call the ESB, pass the device information, including the serial number. ESB can orchestrate a call to ERP to get the location info, and then do the remote call into Salesforce to create the asset and using that info from the ERP, associate the correct location.
All right, sounds good. Thank you. What do you want to go next?
Yeah, I have a question while we're here, James, on location object. Did you assess any standard options for the object and disqualified for a reason? Can you explain a little bit more?
For location, I considered the location standard object that's well originated from field service lightning, but that was a many-to-many with relationship with account, and in this scenario, in this project, my assumption is that locations are associated to only one account. So I thought that this data model would make it simpler with a custom object.
Isn't it possible to make it one-to-many instead of the current many-to-many relationship, or any obstacles you see there?
We could if there's a need for locations to be shared among many accounts. We could
No, I mean the
adapt.
other way around. Like, could you adapt, like, usually within many-to-many, you could use it as one-to-many if you want. It will not limit you. Is there any way that you could simplify the many-to-many out of the box and use it for what you identified here?
Yeah, we could use validation to prevent more than one junction record. No, sorry, that's not going to work. More than one junction record that looks up to, or multiple junction record that look up to different accounts. But maybe I think I'm misinterpreting your question actually.
Oh, you said you did not go with the standard location object because it has many-to-many relationship with an account. And in your situation here, you need a one-to-many relationship. So my follow-up on that was, can we make the many-to-many out of the box work as a one-to-many and avoid the need to a custom object? Or do you see any obstacles in that?
Okay, thanks. Thanks for clarifying. So there would the many-to-many is the way that that's done is by having an object in the middle, a junction object for account location. Yes, there are ways that we could enforce one-to-many involving some validations, but in my opinion, it complicates the solution and wouldn't be justified the extra effort required, and so that I didn't go with that approach.
Okay. Thanks, James. Can we go to system landscape? I have a question there, and then another one on archiving. So you mentioned you will use SMS Magic here for SMS notifications. Is there any standard options that you assess?
Oh yeah, thank you. So I considered Marketing Cloud, but I thought it would be overkill for only one SMS use case, and I didn't see any bulk emailing of non-Salesforce records or Journey Builder, or I didn't see anything like that about campaigns, etc. So I thought it was overkill for the solution that we required.
Is there any core platform option or add-on out of the box Salesforce that you could consider as well?
I also considered digital engagement. To me, that was that also provides like social customer service, WhatsApp, and more additional functionality. So that's why I didn't go with that. I went with a simpler minimum sort of app that could meet our requirement.
Okay, thank you. You talked about archiving, and you will archive objects in case you will archive records and objects like case and others when it is closed, work orders, I guess you mentioned. Can you explain a little bit this archiving process, how it will work?
Right, I forgot to do that, sorry. So the ETL will define criteria for when they can be archived. So for now, it would be case closure or work order completion or task completion. The ETL would call into Salesforce with a nightly job via the bulk API and query records that met those predefined criteria for archival, save them into a data warehouse, and then call back into Salesforce with a bulk API hard delete of those same records.
You mentioned that you will do that once it is closed. Anything outside of close, like what if it's required for a bit of time in the Salesforce platform? How you will manage the triggering points and what you think should be considered before you goes archive?
Good point. Yeah. That was an assumption I made, but realistically, we need to talk to the business to define the retention window. So let's say if it's 90 days, we can change the query to timestamp when that closed happens, and then only archive ones where that is 90 or more days ago.
Okay, good point. Let's zoom out a little bit then. So you may need to manage a little bit for some time before you go ahead with archive, which may impact performance. Can you speak a little bit on what's your strategy will look like then for overall performance uh, between archiving and any other options that you mentioned?
Sure. So if we need to keep them on platform longer, then we need to employ other mitigation strategies. So those would be things like using selective queries whenever possible in reports and list views for related lists that's sort of built in already. So we'd leverage filters on standard indexes and stay under the selectivity threshold for the query for the index. And then if we are filtering on other fields, we use Contact Salesforce to set up a custom index. It slows our writes, but does improve read performance. For case, we could, if we still have issues with performance, we could request a skinny table as well with the most commonly used fields. Yeah. We could also minimize synchronous logic on these objects that's triggered by these objects.
Okay. With that in mind, then, and you discussing with the business and discussing retention, probably with IT as well, and you may end up with keeping some of the closed records either in case or work order for a bit of time. Will that impact your data migration strategy?
Yeah, so oh, I forgot to call out one thing with data migration. So um, uh, they requested 3 years of sales and service orders. I say okay with the sales orders, but service orders that'll give us over close to 11 million. My recommendation was to instead move this to the data warehouse and use an external object to surface that data to prevent performance issues. We could consider similar strategies with case and task as well if they just historical ones need to be available for reference.
So I think you could talk about two options now. Keep it for some time in Salesforce and tune with some short-term options like the ones you mentioned, including skinny table indexes, etc., versus external objects. Can you rethink the whole process and make a final recommendation on short-term, long-term for what stay in Salesforce, what stay outside, and align also data migration to these so that we have some consistency?
Sure, thank you. So I will recommend going with this external object approach for reference data that's no longer operational. We're not triggering logic off of it. We don't need to really update it at all. It's mostly just used for read purposes. Um, so uh, after a certain amount of time goes by after they're closed or completed, we can archive them as I previously mentioned, but the difference being we can still expose them using OData as external objects so that the users can still go find them and reference them when needed.
With that choice, then, what is the impact on data access with external objects and the data access you made on case and work orders? How will you still apply the same concepts on exposure of external objects?
Yeah, so I've made a large assumption I forgot to state there. So external objects don't have sharing. So if there's sensitive info, we can disable reporting and search. Um, then they can only people who have access to the related account or the related record can see them via the related list. But we have a risk where if somebody emails or slacks a direct link to a record, we can't prevent anyone from accessing that. So my assumption is that's an acceptable level of security for the sensitivity of the data in those objects. If not, then we can't use external objects, or we'd have to, yeah, I would go with a different approach if that's not acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Last question on external objects. You said you will do this in data warehouse. How you will make this data in data warehouse available in Salesforce as an external object?
We can, my assumption is the data warehouse is can work with OData. But if not, we can use the ESB as an OData layer over the data warehouse. We would set up an external data source in Salesforce and then define an external object with the columns being fields.
Okay, thanks, James. Ram, Moruna, you have any other question?
Yeah, I have one question. So it says that at present the PDF files are stored in the local laptops and desktops. So can you explain to me how we're gonna, what is the plan for them to be loaded to the new system?
Yeah, first we need to centralize those. So we need to get a campaign going to get the system specialists who have these on their machines to all save them in a centralized location, such as a shared drive, and also rename the files according to a naming convention. I'm recommending using the ERP order ID, as that should be available since we're already using that same ERP. We'd have that as an external ID on the Salesforce order ID, Salesforce order, and we'll get that as part of our data migration, and then we can use that to match and associate the uploaded design docs to the correct record in Salesforce using that shared ID.
Okay, all right, thank you. We have like 20 seconds to go around. You have questions?
Yeah, so under the visibility and accessibility requirement, at one place there is a requirement where you have used external account hierarchy, where you had an assumption that only the account and the related locations should be visible. What if your assumptions are not correct? If they also want to see all the related custom object data and everything, what would be your solution for that?
If it's all these objects, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, so the main challenge there is that sharing set data shared by sharing sets don't roll up via the external account hierarchy. So we would need to use a different sharing mechanism, such as a Lightning Web component without sharing, in order to define which records they would have access to based on the structure of the external account hierarchy.
I think we're out of time. Stop the Q&A. Hey, Raman, stop the recording as well.